for organizing this event and all the guests that are here today. I'm very pleased because we are talking about theater and theaters in a moment when we need to help live theater shows. But not only economically, we need to help theaters that have been put in difficulties because of the pandemic. Because you need to be there to watch a show. You need to be in the theater to have a magical experience. But we also realize that we cannot substitute theater shows with something that's online. But thanks to technology, I have to say that we can reflect on it. We can reflect how technology can help theaters, and by standing, let's say, beside it, because you still have to leave the theater and the show live. So I'd like to thank those that are going to speak here today. And we can also broaden our horizon. So I would like to thank the institutions that are not only in Italy, so we can talk with them. We can talk with institutions in the US, and these institutions have a lot to say to us, so we can grow. And everyone says it, but it's the truth, and nothing will ever be the same. So I wish to everyone a good evening, those that are here and those that are online. Thank you so much.
Benvenuti a tutti, grazie.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you, Professor Garavaglia. I am Maria Cristina Vannini, and I will be the moderator today. Today we will have a round table. Many of the participants will be online, but I hope that in the future we will be all here in the room. I hope so. We have the artistic director of the Onstage Festival here with us, and she will explain to us what is the Onstage Festival. Thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the university. It's a real honor for me because this festival was born in 2019, and we modeled this festival on an American one called Onstage as well. So we want to bridge the gap between the artists and the public. Ideally, Onstage is a pillar that bridges the gap. And today is the second edition of this festival. This is an international conference, so this is a real moment of dialogue. The theme today is really important. and we will have an international dialogue, and I think it's really important. We wish to bring American independent theaters in Italy, and we put subtitles to them in Italy so that people can understand. And we also developed a relationship with Loma 3 that gives us the translators. So we also have this relationship. The American Embassy recognizes our work. And this year we start in Milan today. And this represents our work. And then we will continue tomorrow and the day after with 2 shows in Theater Menotti. Then we will go to Rome with 5 different shows. Then we will go in Ostia in another theater. Then we will go to Cagliari in Sardinia, and then to Pescara. So this is the second edition, and we will go to more cities. And we are very honored. Thanks, you. And I will finish my speech by mentioning Tommaso Tellung and Laura Capadotti. She helps the American relationships. And I'm sure I forgot someone, and I'm saying sorry if I forgot someone. Thank you, Maria Cristina. Thanks to you, and it's not easy bridging the gap between 2 continents that may seem close, but when it concerns the theater context, there are differences. And speaking about sustainability, not only economical sustainability, I want to say that the US has been for years a great philanthropic nation, the US. And today we will see their philanthropy in detail. The pandemic moved the focus from art and culture to health and scientific research. We already said this in another Bookcity event, and we think that culture can save the planet. And this speech today about theater wants to explain how culture can save humanity. So I will call on stage Professor Esposito, and online we will have Randy Berry, Executive Director of Indie Space and Board Indie Theater Fund. Unluckily, here inside the room, we are not many, but I'm sure that a lot of people are following us online, both in Italy and outside of Italy. And if you have some questions to ask, please ask. Ask if you are online on YouTube and on social media, because we will have a Q&A session
Quindi grazie mille Anna Maria.
Thank you so much, Anna Maria. Thank you, Cristina. Good evening, everyone. I would like to thank Professor Galavaglia. First of all, I want to introduce myself. I'm Anna Maria Esposito, professor in management and marketing here at Yale University. And I would like to define the word sustainability and its influence in the theater field. And I would like to talk about the Italian theater production model and what challenges we have to face today. So sustainability, this word derives from Latin, and it means to take care of, to sustain. It's a complex concept. And the first time this word was used in the economic and political field. It refers to maintaining a certain type of well-being. But this word is also used as a synonym for sustainable development. Sustainable development is a concept first emerged in 1987. And it's defined as a process, but this process does not need to endanger the environment. So sustainable development, the key word, of course, is sustainability. But we have some different kinds of sustainability. We have economical sustainability, environmental sustainability, but also social sustainability. So economic sustainability probably is the one we hear the most, along with environmental sustainability. Environmental sustainability, of course, means to save our planet. And economic sustainability means that industrial development needs to be balanced. And then we have social sustainability that aims at preserving social customs and a sense of identity. So these three types of sustainability are the most common and can coexist. All three can coexist. So we can have a lot of benefits and at the same time preserve the environment and our values. It's a dynamic concept. Even if we may think that it's static, as I was saying before, sustainability is very talked about today. We have the European Green Deal that aims to save the environment and fight climate change. And we also know that Europe developed the new European Bauhaus. Bauhaus stands in the middle between art and technology and brings the European Green Deal in our life. So we need to face these big challenges that stand in front of us, and one of them is digitalization. Right now, we are trying to restart after the pandemic, so we need to redistribute equitably the resources. But what these have got to do with theater? Well, theater is sustainable, we can say, culturally. It's part of the theater's DNA, but also economic sustainability. Theater is fundamental. Economic sustainability allows us to produce theater shows and reach our artistic goals. And a part of the theater field is sustained by public money. So public money helps in part theaters, but selling tickets for shows is the other part of what helps theaters survive, you know. But when we are in a pandemic and we cannot sell tickets, what do we do? Well, it's not a nice situation, of course. So a lot of theaters had to stop, unfortunately. However, this for sure it's important, but I think that theaters can try to network and share resources with other people. And so by working with others and and then we took some projects from these startups. And so I think this is very important, especially right now during the pandemic. As Professor Galvaglia was saying, this is really important for theaters right now. And theaters are facing some difficulties right now. But also, we have another problem. People have other ways of spending their free time. They don't always go to the theater.
Of course, the sector
settore, e questo ancora si aggiunge ad un eccesso di offerta, quindi molti spettacoli.
an excess of offer or see
Forse, no? Quindi poca circolazione di questi spettacoli. E tutto questo conduce ad una situazione abbastanza impegnativa, che è il precariato che caratterizza questo settore. Meno distribuzione vuol dire meno repliche e quindi meno lavoro. Per quanto riguarda invece la sostenibilità ambientale, possiamo dire che tra le vocazioni educative
environment sustainability, we can say that the green aspect has a central role. In fact, it is at the center of the theater production, but there are also other aspects which are valorized apart from the Bauhaus that we said before, but also the Ministry of Culture, thanks to a new plan for resilience, which is helping, of course, and the sector. Unfortunately, I'm late. So as I was saying, I was talking about the green sustainability, but what can theater do? Would also an economic sustainability would be necessary, but there's also the aspect of social sustainability, which is linked to the cultural one, because theater offer a well-being for people, especially doing theater, and it creates values which are good for society, and it is able to develop a sort of sustainability which is cultural, of course. It's able to create a situation, especially in bad parts of cities, which can be good for people. And now I conclude saying that theater has to face many challenges. First of all, to reconnect with the public again. But how can we do that? It is important to activate this kind of consumption again, because it is different from the restaurant sector, because theater is important only for 20% of people. And so we also need to reflect on and to think about the process that started online, to think again about a system of finance and financing.
Riconoscere uno statuto speciale ai lavoratori dello spettacolo.
Finally, we should take care of the people who work in this sector. The question is, how can sustainability be pursued, and which role has it in motivating the economic sustainability? Because the public entities and the territories, how can sustain a sustainable theater? We will have the answer during the intervention later. We'll try to define a geography of the sector that must be redefined. Thank you. And now, in order not to be late, I will say when we will have just 3 minutes left, and we talk only when there will be questions. I hope that now online we have Randy Berry. Randy, are you with us?
Hello, hello Randy, good to have you here. Mi hanno detto che devo parlare in italiano, che quindi la tua...
So they told me I have to speak Italian right now. So the questions will be translated for you. So please tell me if you can hear the English translation.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying in English.
Okay. So I continue in English. Do I?
If that's okay.
Yes, it is. Sorry for that. So thank you very much for being here. Randy, I will make the introduction to you in Italian. You know who you are. Good. Allora, Randy Berry è una produttrice del teatro indie della scena di New York, ma non solo, internazionale. È stata la co-founder della Requiem Ensemble Theatre Company e dell'Indie Theatre Fund and Indie Space. Ha creato tantissimi programmi che hanno aiutato artisti, giovani anche magari non così giovani artisti a ricevere fondi e è essa stessa
So Randy Berry is the executive director of Indie Space and Board Indie Theater Fund. She's also an actress herself. She made a lot of performances, and she's in the Theater Hall of Fame, and also was nominated Indie Theater Hero.
Important person to be here with us among another number of very important person of this theater, of this sector. You are supposed to give us the counterbalance of the theater situation in the United States. As you might have heard from Anna Maria Esposito, the situation, yes, the situation in Italy has been a little critic, not only because of the pandemic situation, but also earlier. Okay. How is it? How was it? And how is it now in the United States?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. It's been a really rough 20 months for theater in the US, for sure. We're starting to see theater come back. The government allowed us to do a lot more theater out on the streets. We have an open culture program that brought theater outside, and that started bringing the arts back in New York City. In April, we were allowed to start having some shows inside with distance and masking, but it's been slow going. It's been difficult to get people back in the seats. Broadway opened in September, which helped energize the sector, certainly, but ticket sales are difficult even on Broadway at this point. People are still hesitant to be in the theater at very high capacities, very close to one another. In New York, our vaccination rate is very high though, and so we do see it's starting to turn, thank goodness.
Good. But what do you think the audience expects now from the theater sector and especially from the indie theater sector?
I think the audience expects innovation. The indie theater sector always innovates. We're used to operating with very little resources and on the margins. Even before the pandemic, this was not a sustainable way to produce theater with very little funds. But the indie theater community was the first to pivot. Just right as soon as the theater closed, we were online more and able to get out into the street and do theater outside safely, faster than larger institutions are able. And I do think that our audience expects that of us. They expect innovation and they expect a more equitable experience for the audience. A lot of our artists were working online, in a hybrid way, online and in person, even before the pandemic. And so those that were doing radio plays or podcasts around the theaters were able to jump in very quickly. And I think that's what the audience expects of our sector.
Yes, and good luck to all the sector for this. But what do you think about the intersection that many artistic and cultural institutions had the possibility to create. For instance, some Italian museum has developed some new production with theater or ballet or other things, because there was some sort of synergy, let's say, that was required to the sector in order to stay alive and to maintain the contact with the audience. Do you think that something that can be continue in the future?
Absolutely. We saw that type of resource sharing and partnership, coalition building more than ever. And we needed that pre-pandemic. We needed that before. So I do think that the dire circumstances allowed people to let go of the competitive nature of the work and started pushing us towards one another in a really positive way. We administer something called the Cultural Solidarity Fund. And that was a group of 17 cultural organizations and institutions. It was museums, dance companies, theater companies, visual artists that came together to create a relief fund that would support all of the individuals working in the various institutions. And it was, you know, unprecedented for us to come together and use our own financial resources in order to take care of the individuals within our institutions. And I see this as the only way forward, especially with rents as high as they are in New York City. It's very difficult if you don't use your space 365 days a year. To pay for it 365 days a year is a challenge under the best circumstances. So some of the ways that we have found to move forward is putting multiple theater companies in one building to share rent and other expenses. It brings in more income and it has the space utilized more time, you know, more time during the year. We've been thinking about a lot of different ways that we can work together in order to manage.
That's very interesting, because at this point, the aspect connected to the competition Anna Maria Esposito was talking about is overcome by this solidarity spirit, and that's very good. But do you think that the Biden reform that was just approved might help in creating some sort of new federal art project? Do you expect something of this kind by this administration in support to cultural field and theater in specific?
I wish we were seeing a lot more of it. We did get in the first relief package the SVOG, S-V-O-G, it's the shared venues operational grants. And that did bring a lot of relief funds to presenting venues, anybody that had live art in their space, theater, music, dance. That was definitely helpful, but it was not nearly enough. And this, you know, the United States doesn't value the performing arts in the ways that we wish they would. So, you know, the NEA, the National Endowment for the Arts, is cut consistently. We, in some additional relief, we got an extra $40 million in our state budget, $40 million for New York State that houses thousands of arts institutions is not even, it doesn't even scratch the surface. So I do hope that with the infrastructure plan coming, that there will be some additional relief. But the truth of the matter is, this country, as the government, doesn't value the arts as part of the day-to-day necessity of life the way that we wish it would. Artists, I'll say the one thing, many artists that work in New York City are gig workers, and they work on a project by project basis. And it wasn't until the pandemic that they were ever eligible to claim unemployment in between jobs, or to get any sort of government assistance, as if, you know, recognizing them as real workers, cultural workers, versus artists that were, you know, just supposed to survive jumping from gig to gig with nothing to support them in between. It was only in the pandemic that 1099 workers, that's the tax structure, 1099 workers were able to be covered by unemployment and other government assistance.
Yes, that's really a common situation throughout the world, I think, of the workers of the cultural field and the theater field also. The last question about private sponsorship, and in a way to introduce also the further talkings about crowdfunding. How do you think that people can be engaged in sustaining, economically sustaining, or advocacy with the advocacy? And what do you think about the new trends of private sponsorship towards the arts? Do you see a stop? Do you see a new comeback? Do you see an engagement, let's say, between science, research, and culture? Because, as you know, in many countries, for instance, in Canada also, some cultural fruition is prescribed as a therapy by physicians. So do you think it can be some sort of possible things for the next coming years?
I would hope so. As far as the science and medicine is concerned, we give mental health grants right now also for our artists who have suffered tremendous emotional and psychological strain during the last 20 months. As far as private support, we saw a tremendous amount of support and the individuals really rallying around artists. I think with all of us home locked up in our houses for months on end, what did we all turn to? We turned to Netflix and TV and music and streaming theater in order to get us through. And I do think that there was a recognition by private funders and individuals of the necessity and how much we depend and rely on artists all the time, right? I think that, but especially when we were all home together. I don't see yet the connection. This is comes back to the question of our government and the country valuing the arts the way that we think they should. We do know that with also one of the last relief plans, though, schools were able to hire back music, theater, and dance teachers into schools. And we know if a good, strong arts curriculum starts in elementary school, students are more likely to value the arts in their life as they grow older. And we also know that there's all sorts of scientific evidence about arts in schools and how that benefits you in math and in reading and all the other factors that make a good, well-rounded human being as they grow. We'll see. We'll see about that.
So thank you very much for having been with us, and I hope you can follow the round table with us. And if some question for you will raise, I will be very happy to call you back. Or if you have some question yourself for the other participants, so you're welcome to join in anytime you want. Thank you very much, Randy.
Thank you. Bye.
And now, after my performance in English, we will go and talk about the next guest, Alessandra Valerio. Please come on stage. And then after this, we will online Angelo Lindone, founder and director of Produzioni del Basso, and also online John Kaiser, director of Material for the Arts. Thanks for being here, Valerio. You mainly deal with capacity building and sustainability of cultural organization. So you're perfect for us today. And you work for Caliplo Foundation. That is a benchmark for the Italian cultural politics, thanks to all the philanthropy that Foundation Cariplo does in Italy. Because Cariplo Foundation doesn't do philanthropy only here in Lombardy, but also near in Novara. So in the last 30 years, Caliplo Foundation helped a lot cultural projects. They granted a lot of funds. And we're talking about billions of euros that Foundation Cariplo donated.
A supporto degli organi istituzionali e delle aree filantropiche, decidendo quindi poi quali ambiti sostenere.
So the foundation has a team that helps to decide what we should grant money towards. So I leave you the floor. Hi everyone, I'm Alessandra Valerio and I work with the Cariplo Foundation in the art and culture sector. So I'd like to explain what are bank foundations. They are something special here in Italy. They were established in the 1990s here in Italy. And here in Italy, we have two laws specifically for bank foundations. And these laws are the Amato Carli and the Ciampi law. And they help the society. And they mainly operate by granting money. So the Cariplo Foundation has some projects that the foundation manages itself, but also gives money to other projects. Okay, so the foundation of Bank Origin mainly help their own territory. Sometimes they operate on a national level, and sometimes they help even foreign areas. They help the third sector in Italy, the tourism sector. So the idea is that bank foundations help the social activity of their territory. So the foundations devolved almost 24 billion euros and granted them towards more than 400,000 initiatives. The foundations use their own money and also have some investments, and they grant this money towards national projects. The art and culture sector got 23% of the resources in 2020. So the bank foundations in Italy help a lot the theater sector and the cultural sector, especially in a difficult moment like this one. Cadiplo Foundation, in particular, gives money for projects that help people and the society. We aim to bridge inequality and promote economic and social growth. In 2020, we awarded 142 million euros. And in 2020, the art and culture sector got 25% of this money. So the scientific research, for once, is not on the first place. So who gets these resources? Bank foundations, by law, can help NGOs, churches, and non-profits. As I was saying, we helped live shows because we believe that culture is very important for welfare and for the society. In 30 years, Caliplo Foundation awarded 1.2 billion euros, and I want to underline this. And we hope that people can safely go back into theaters and other cultural places, of course. Right now, we are aiming to support culture. We want to experiment with new models, and we hope to bring the citizens into this, and we also wish to help the more fragile ones, let's say, like elderly people. We want to develop sustainably, of course. Culture for us is very important, extremely, for the growth of this society. We consider culture as an asset. Then we do capacity building. We aim to improve organizations and also help these organizations to pursue their own goals. And we help them by improving their organizations. And we also help them by improving their ways of crowdfunding. Then we help them also with their personnel, and we help them improve the skills of their staff. So sustainability for us as a foundation is very important. We aim to have sustainable relationships, but also a sustainable relationship with other organizations. Culture for us means finding people who we can communicate with and understand with them how to have a relationship with the public and build trust with the public. We wish to get more people into our public. We also aim to understand what are the land's needs and help the communities here. We also believe that it's important for organizations to adapt so that we can develop sustainably. And this for us means finding new models and develop these models. Competition for us is important, but of course, cooperation is better and can be strategic. So we need to find these models that work and use them. We also wish to share knowledge and answer the needs of this sector. We wish to help the organizations during this difficult moment. So, of course, I believe that foundations of bank origin are really important to help the theater model. Thank you so much.
So what Fondazione Cariplo does reflects what has been expressed by our American colleague during the questions about the relationship with the audience and the protection of artistic workers. And now we have with us Angelo Rindone. I hope that he will be online with us.
Nel mondo virtuale.
Eccomi, buon pomeriggio.
Angelo Rindone è fondatore di Produzioni dal Basso.
The founder director of Produzioni dal Basso, which is the first crowdfunding platform.
Buonasera, dottor Rindone.
Hi, good evening.
Membro del comitato scientifico dell'Associazione Italiana dell'Equity Crowdfunding ed è docente della The Fundraising School e del Sole 24 Ore Business School. Produzione dal
Business School.
Crowdfunding al servizio di progetti.
So, crowdfunding for ethical projects.
Qual è
how your platform was created and how do you work and which are the ideas and the opportunities for the future, especially in terms of crowdfunding and fundraising for theaters. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your invitation.
Sicuramente un momento interessante di confronto e anche per entrare in contatto con delle tematiche molto attuali e molto importanti.
Dialogue for important topics. We are a crowdfunding platform online, and our job, our aim is to present different projects. So cultural, social, or startup projects, but also campaigns, which can be launched by single person, people. And crowdfunding has always been used for theater and theater initiatives. But why? Because on one hand, we have the basic dynamic where there's a subject, a group with an idea or a project. And on the other hand, we have a community which is interested in helping these people using money and offering money, because we can have collaborations and also sharing on the areas and territories or finding clients. So what I want to say is that for sure, crowdfunding all over the world and in Italy, thanks to all the platforms that are present nowadays, is an interesting tool where everyone can experiment the funding. So the perfect mix between the telling of and the funding. So the gathering of money in order to realize a project. But in the recent years, many things are happening. First of all, the platforms, the crowdfunding platforms are full of projects, but also full of different ideas of making projects. For Produzioni dal Basso in particular, we are seeing different subjects that are trying to build different initiatives for financing these projects. So we can find companies that occupy of CSR or ESG projects, but also open innovation projects. We can find also foundations too. For example, Fondazione Cariplo, on a platform of the bank Intesa San Paolo, launched a project for culture and co-finance different projects thanks to crowdfunding on the platform for funding of Intesa San Paolo. These to highlight how on crowdfunding platforms we also find ideas of projects. We also hosted the civic crowdfunding of Milan. We are hosting the project of Venice, and universities too are starting to build initiatives on platforms. We host the Bicocca University, and we just launched a space for the University of Milan. And I don't want to spoiler, but it is quite evident that municipalities, regions, and schools are make projects. But what do these subjects do? And what kind of project do they present? They launch many notices for financing, and they try to gather ideas, projects, innovative projects, with elements of cultural, social, environmental innovation. They selection these projects and they finance them even till 75%. And this is enabling the realization of different hubs and spaces of opportunity for different sectors, especially for the third sectors, for the cooperatives, but also for startups or cultural enterprises, as a place of creation of projects. Of course, they always take into account the theme of sustainability, the social sustainability, the cultural sustainability. And on our platform, we also gave the possibility to highlight the goals of sustainability that are present in the Agenda 2030, the famous SDGs. And we are about to introduce other elements about sustainability, which are fundamental. And it is also fundamental to measure the impact which is generated by these projects.
Quindi, per concludere, e do anche qualche consiglio poi ai ragazzi del mondo del teatro.
Advice to everyone who is present today. Crowdfunding is an opportunity that can make in contact someone who has a project, someone who wants to finance this project, but also because we are developing a space where we can build relationships in order to co-finance innovative and interesting projects. So I have the first advice, so the elements of project. So projecting is not an aspect.
La progettazione oggi deve prendere,
but it must regard different subjects and different individuals that can build a useful project. And I think about the third sector, the administrations, all the companies on the territory. So projecting is developing too much. So if we want to have financing, we need to dialogue with everyone.
Governance anche legato a questo, però è sicuramente uno spazio. L'altro, lo si diceva prima, era l'ascolto.
The advice is to listen and to be open to everything, especially for theater. Recently, I was invited to a formation course, and I was touched by a girl who was saying that theater was before the COVID period, but they were saying that before the pandemic, 80% of the audience of theater was formed by workers, by art workers.
Sì, la vediamo.
Ok.
La vediamo.
No, e dicevo, e questo ovviamente è un tema, cioè è chiaro che il teatro...
This is a topic, of course, because in general, theater and art institutions must be able to have a dialogue with the territory and has to be open to a dialogue with everyone because it was born on the streets and cannot close the doors. It's fundamental with other projects of innovations that Randy talked about before. It is important to open the theater dialogue, and I think that is fundamental to find other interesting opportunities, especially thanks to crowdfunding. I really think that theater was able during last years, and not only last years, to make a connection with communities and territorial communities.
Che è stata fatta durante questi mesi di pandemia nella proposta
I think that what we have been through during this pandemic,
la situazione in cui erano costretti a trovarsi abbia fatto sì che anche quelli che eventualmente
made it possible
territorio hanno dovuto lavorare,
to change the situation for everyone, and we will have many examples later in terms of opening and dialogue between communities. But of course, the theme of co-projecting and cooperation
in considerazione per quanto
it's
riguarda
something that we will be taking consideration by everyone. So thank you so much. I hope that you will be with us later too.
E passiamo subito la parola a John Claude.
I leave the floor to John Claude Kaiser, who is the Education Director of Material for the Arts.
Vediamo se c'è. Intanto inizio a presentare.
He's present. Now I'm going to introduce him, John Claude Kaiser.
Ha iniziato una sua collettiva di arte che viene chiamata The Freestyle
Arts Collective 20 years ago.
Ha sempre lavorato
worked in the art using recycled materials.
È un conferenziere, insegna all'Università di New York e insegna
NYU.
E una cosa molto interessante che mi farà piacere
really interesting
con il CERN
is that he collaborated with CERN in Switzerland, and he is also Arts Administrator of the Years by the New York City Association. So Material for the Arts is an interesting institution, and Claude Kaiser will talk about it.
You will be translated, and so please go on. It's a pleasure to have you here. Where are you exactly? I think that you are in one of the how do you call it? Sites, venues of Material for the Arts. And so thank you for being here, and that's the stage is yours.
Thank you so much for having me and for what sounds like such a wonderful gathering of such meaningful things, sustainability, theater, global dialogue, so beautiful. So I'm John, and I'm here literally in Materials for the Arts, which is a giant free store for artists in New York City. And what we do is we literally collect leftover materials from companies, from individuals, from all sorts of places, and then we redonate those materials to artists, especially including theaters. And if you could imagine all the fantastic theater groups in New York City, they're all welcome to come here and to literally go down aisle after aisle, you can see here, of supplies. And I just wanted you to physically see this space here, to see these rolls of fabric behind me, each one donated and used perhaps for costumes, for theater curtains, for all sorts of stage decoration. And just to see this space, to understand the possibilities for artists. This is a program that's run by the city of New York. It's run to help artists, and it also helps the environment by saving these materials. But for you folks, maybe you're running a theater company, maybe you run a not-for-profit, maybe you are thinking about how you could help in the efforts within your city. There's lots of ways that a reuse facility like this can happen. You can make as simple as a small box that you keep in your house and you fill up with things, and that's the limit, all the way to a massive warehouse or somewhere in between. Sometimes people just have a small vehicle, a car, they keep the trunk full, they bring it to places. Sometimes it's a library or a community center that has a little area where they collect things. And sometimes it's a school. So what we do is we literally have all sorts of materials divided into different sections. So if you can imagine, this is just the ribbon and the rope section. This is the zipper section with just zippers, right? So the list goes on and on into this fantastic, huge warehouse here, where we have everything from props to everything else. Yeah.
I read that that this organization has started in '78, isn't it?
That's right.
Yes, and yeah, and what's the business model of this organization? Because you really supply, you really create a supply chain from for the circular economy. Someone who doesn't need something anymore, and you donate these things to somebody who can reuse it. And where is the balance on which your organization can be sustainable?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the speaker before me was talking about storytelling and talking about. I think that for a lot of times when we're talking about sustainability, we're talking about the future, about ideas of what could happen. But this place exists. It's been here for years, and so this is an example of how these systems actually work, how they are sustainable. We are able to donate more money in terms of the value of our supplies to the city of New York than it costs for our program to exist. So as long as we're able to communicate that value and that return on investment to the city, to not-for-profits, then there's no reason why they wouldn't want to keep supporting the program. So for example, a good example is the public schools. So we donate supplies to the public schools. Now, the New York City public schools, I think they had a budget of something like $4 million for art supplies. We donated an additional $4 million of supplies. So just being able to tell a story like that really clarifies that we're helping the environment, but we're also saving money for the city and making more art programs possible and making the schools better. So by connecting the artists to the schools, by thinking about the connection between the donors, and by telling that story very clearly, we're able to keep getting the funding from the city and from nonprofit supporters as well.
That's very interesting. Yes, that's really interesting. And what amazed me was the fact that your mission and value statement is very important, is very relevant, and that the objective that the organization set belonged to a period when sustainability was not on the agenda. It means that you are very contemporary on this topic. have you found some hindrances or some periods in which your activities was facilitated and others when your activity was less facilitated?
You know, I think that first of all, we live in New York, you know, so New York City is a very forward-thinking community. So it would make sense that this kind of thing would be able to happen here sooner, and that the political will of the citizens would be in support of it. So that's certainly an advantage. I think that what happens is that literally, you mentioned we started in 1977. It happened naturally. So there's so much leftover materials here. Everyone lives in small places, that it just became a conversation. What do we do with the good stuff? You know, what do we do? I think the special thing in New York is that it became connected to the arts. And I would say that probably when this message is successful, it's when the arts are telling the story, you know, and not just by, you know, a play about recycling, but when they're just doing what they do best and showcasing the success stories of sustainability, and then telling these compelling stories in ways that people can't help understand. I think it's least successful when it's me talking and telling people. Because, I mean, even right now, this is a little bit more engaging because I'm showing you physical things, etc. But I'm not doing an art show right now. I'm just talking. You know, I'm trying to speak from the heart. But I would say that utilizing the arts is the most key moment for us. Every time we've used the arts to tell the story, we've had much more success.
Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure to walk with you in your office, as you called it. And so, but let us know, what did you do with the CERN in Switzerland?
Ah, yes. Well, it's an interesting place to think about, the place between, I guess you could say, perception, creativity on one side, the arts, and then on the other side, thinking about, you know, physical stuff, sustainability, the science of it, I guess you could say. And so I collaborated with two scientists at CERN, one who was a physicist building, you know, the nuclear reactor, one who was a data scientist in charge of thinking of computer technology. And what they were doing is they were finding old photographs of the CERN space that had been destroyed by water and mold and started to deteriorate. And we used those images for an art show to talk about how when things change or when they're destroyed or when they deteriorate, there's a new life that can come out of that. And there's lots of similarities in the sciences and physics that connect. So it was very interesting.
Absolutely, and I think it's the same thing that you have been making with material for the arts. So
absolutely,
thank you for having been here with us. And so just keep on following us. So when some question will be done, maybe you can be called back to answer. Thank you very much,
absolutely,
John.
Thank you.
And it was a pleasure.
Good work, everyone.
Grazie mille. E adesso chiamo sul palco le ultime due nostre ospiti.
I'm going to have our two last guests.
La dottoressa, la direttrice, non so come chiamarla, il fulcro del teatro TF Teatro Milano e Menotti, Teatro Filippo Perego, la signora Enza Pineda e Megan Finn.
And Megan Finn, who is the artistic director of the Tank in New York.
Io le chiedo, non sto neanche a presentarla perché credo che...
I'm not going to introduce you because I think that in Milan and in the theater world, you don't need any kind of presentation and introduction.
Teatro Filippo
I think that we can call it New Teatro Milano e Menotti Filippo Perego. Yeah, exactly. Since 2020. It has been a real story of cooperation, listening. You have done a lot, and I'd like you to talk about this path and all the perspective that you will offer. I'm happy to be here today because I listened to all the intervention today, and these have been really stimulating. We are a theater company that manage a theater, so we are a production group who is sustained by the FUS convention by from 1989 by the municipality of Milan and the region of Lombardy. The public financing and the auto financing, so sponsors, tickets, and so on. We can say that public events are just 30%. We started in 2010 thanks to the municipality of Milan too.
Residenziale di Milano, non molto
Theater
lontano
of Elfo,
del Duomo, che nasce, che si trova all'interno di un condominio. Ci sono 4 palazzine.
By the building, there were 4 buildings, and inside there's our Menotti Theater, a small theater with just 500 places, seats. Started a project of restructuring in 2018. We feared
alla fine del
that period because by the end of 2018,
pubblicata su change.org
started a sort of negotiation.
Una richiesta, salviamo il Teatro Menotti perché
there was a request online who was called Let's Save Teatro.
In un garage. E un'azione
it probably could be transformed into a garage. And of course, we had a strong campaign where everyone demonstrated their love. The audience demonstrated their love.
Il nostro assessore alla cultura del Comune di Milano, che era poco tempo fa Filippo del Corno, e
we met Filippo del Corno, the assessor to culture, who represented the social function of a theater. And we started a round table with the municipality, with the Lombardy and the Caripolo Foundation in order to try to solve this crisis. And we started a crowdfunding operation in June 2019. We met different communication agencies, but no one could communicate our idea and who we are. So we decided to do it all alone. Called different testimonials.
Però in tutto questo siamo aiutati da un team di giovanissimi.
Were helped by a group of young people who were under 25-year-old who helped us to share our request and our request for help on a platform. We gathered
nel giro di pochissimo
5,000 euros. Then we also led a campaign of art bonus.
di giovani.
These thanks to the help of young people of less than 35 years of age.
Che si occupa di beneficenza, un trust benefico che ha il 20% della beneficenza è destinata alle attività.
Trust heard about it.
Veniamo contattati dal trust e che subito ci è sembrato quasi
Contacted by this trust, and this seemed like a dream for us because their aim was to buy the theater and to leave it to be managed for 16 years, or at least to guarantee the artistic and management possibility with a low rent of restructuring.
Includendo anche il nome del trust che
keep the name, including the name of the trust, of course.
Il discorso va avanti e si conclude a dicembre del 2019.
Everything concluded in December 2019. With the purchase of the theater, and in February 2020, through a press release, we communicated it, but unfortunately there was the pandemic, but we used that period.
Ci porta alla riapertura del teatro, rinnovato, ristrutturato e
structuring and renovate our theater.
Volevo parlare anche brevemente di un'altra forma di finanziamento, perché la
I'd
ristrutturazione
like to talk also about a new way of, because despite all the money gathered, art sponsor bonus and crowdfunding, there was a group of people
che ha permesso ai fornitori della ristrutturazione di partecipare.
who allowed the suppliers to participate in a sort of project to reduce the costs of our renovation. And of course, the region Lombardy sustained us too. We're able to open again in June 2021.
Un esempio esemplare, un modello di
An important example of involvement of everything that could be activated. So the audience, the actors, and every art worker, and you, that you did everything that you could in order to save the theater. And as you were saying before, everything transformed into some sort of poetry that touched the patron. Probably if there was, if this participation wasn't present, this wouldn't take place, probably. Yes, of course, we had such a strength, and every one of us is really involved, such as Emilio Russo, the artistic director, and everyone was so involved
che le idee, che la capacità.
So every idea and every kind of ability to be authentic
per fare forse spazio ad
and showed how the possibility of the theater to close. We involved also famous actors that we didn't even know. But when we explained our problem, everyone agreed with us and got in a very few time, because we had to start the crowdfunding, and everyone wanted to be present. Yeah, that's the magic of theater. That's fantastic, and that's a fantastic experience. And the fact of having a patron who helped you and gave you a trust and gave you indication and information, because he gave you money, but you wanted, of course, to have his name on the theater. How do you live this relationship with him? I think that is a fantastic relationship, a collaborative relationship. Everyone is interested in our spectacles and our plays.
Questo benefattore, che è l'architetto Filippo Perego di Cremnago, avesse
granted obvious that his name has to be present in the name of the theater. And it was our idea to give the theater the name of Filippo Perego. And we really love this relationship. Of course, our 16 years of work need some sort of generational exchange, and we collaborated with young people who were 22, 23, 24 years old. Or there will be young people who will take our place and our role. Oh, good luck.
So, Megan, it's your time. How are you?
I'm well. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for being here with us. Really. Did you have time to get accustomed with everything here?
I have so much to say. I'm going to try to be economical in how I communicate, but this has been very fruitful and things that, yes, we talk about and are living every day. So it's been...
Megan Finn è la direttrice artistica di The Tank, che è appunto una piccola, se vogliamo chiamarla piccola, organizzazione non profit che serve per produrre e sostenere le attività dei giovani artisti. Megan è stata la direttora artistica anche di 3LD Art and Technology Center. I suoi lavori sono stati visti ed esposti, se vogliamo dire, al The Tank, al Victoria and Albert, alla Serpentine Galleries, al Logan Center for the Arts in Chicago, in Mexico City, all over the world. E ha diretto diversi film e anche short film e altre insomma, produzioni mondiali. Io parlo in italiano e tu traduci tutto, quindi no. Abbiamo sentito da Enza Pineda
We heard from Enza Pineda how fundraising was for the theater, the art and the emotional part of
una grande forza. Come succede da voi ad Tank? Come riuscite a sostenere l'opera di questi giovani artisti emergenti e come li portate a compiere, a diventare artisti compiuti?
become effective artists?
The mission of the Tank is to remove the economic barriers from the creation of new work by emerging artists. We do that primarily by providing free space and resources, including marketing, box office support, general management, full access to equipment and lighting and sound packages, and a slew of other things for free to 2,500 artists every year in New York City.
La nostra missione al The Tank è quella di rimuovere tutte le barriere economiche e noi facciamo questo fornendo degli spazi gratuiti e delle risorse agli artisti e aiutandoli anche con la questione del box office e dando loro degli strumenti gratuiti e altri tipi di risorse e quindi aiutiamo circa 25.000 artisti al The Tank.
The way this relates specifically to sustainability is we utilize all of our resources in a sharing model. So it creates a space where we're not wasting space, for instance, that we're paying to cool and heat. It's being utilized by artists who need it. It also, we talk about a radical redistribution of risk. Because when we do not need to, when every single show does not need to succeed, it does not need to be a sellout. A show can do well, and then a show can do less well, and one of them sustains the other one. That creates an environment where artistic risk is also possible. So we have a very vital, excited community of artists who have the ability to create work that can risk failing.
Quindi la sostenibilità si collega a questo grazie al fatto che noi riutilizziamo le risorse e quindi creiamo uno spazio che non sprechi niente, non sprechi energia per raffreddarlo oppure riscaldarlo. E quindi possiamo parlare di ridistribuzione del rischio perché non abbiamo bisogno che tutti gli spettacoli siano effettivamente un successo. Per esempio uno spettacolo può andare male, un altro può andare bene e questi si supportano a vicenda e quindi il rischio diventa possibile e si forma quindi una comunità di artisti che lavorano con entusiasmo senza preoccupazione.
You can think of us like the Netflix of small theaters in New York City. There's a lot of work. I relate very much to this story of community. And I think when Randy Berry was talking, who's a dear friend and very important advocate for arts organizations in New York City, community is what has sustained the theater in New York and in several ways. And I'd like to just speak to those ways. And the first is clearly the artistic community. In the case of the Tank, we were shuttered by the government on March 13th. And by March 17th, our community of artists had come together wanting to begin to make work in the virtual sphere.
Possiamo pensare al The Tank come a una sorta di Netflix della scena teatrale newyorkese e infatti mi ritrovo molto nella storia del teatro che abbiamo sentito prima, e anche quando la mia amica, carissima amica Randy stava parlando, lei è una fortissima sostenitrice della scena teatrale, e quindi la comunità artistica a New York è molto importante, ma è stata distrutta dal governo, e in particolar modo il 13 marzo, e abbiamo visto che invece il 17 marzo gli artisti si sono riuniti per cercare di resistere a queste azioni.
Our funding model relies on box office, but it comes in little bits, right? So for us, we have a unique situation in that we do have a lot of revenue that comes from box office. So when the pandemic started, it was a very huge hit to us. Then, however, we do have some money that comes from the city, some funds that come from the state, obviously private foundations and individuals. And then other sources, fiscal sponsorship of other organizations that then helps to support us. So but the box office clearly is a huge loss during the pandemic. So what we did was immediately started partnering with other organizations. This is something that was happening sector-wide. And when we talk about, so I don't want to get ahead of the translator, but when we talk about even the government subsidy that came in was the result of organizations banding together and working essentially to lobby for that funding. And that happened almost immediately. We had large organizations to the smallest on the telephone once a day. There was something called a Culture at 3 call. At 3 p.m., a representative from almost every organization in New York City would be on the phone and listening to what was happening across the sector. You've never had that kind of communication until the pandemic.
Quindi il nostro modello di finanziamento si basa assolutamente sui biglietti degli spettacoli, ma in questa situazione questa è stata una situazione unica, perché naturalmente moltissimi dei ricavi che abbiamo derivano dai biglietti, e per questo la pandemia è stato un danno enorme per noi, ma naturalmente riceviamo fondi anche dalla città di New York, dallo Stato, abbiamo dei finanziamenti privati da parte di individui e altri fonti che ci supportano. Quindi, appunto, come ho già detto, la perdita dei biglietti è stata enorme, e per questo motivo ci siamo subito alleati, abbiamo creato delle partnership con altre organizzazioni in tutto il settore artistico. E quando si parla dei finanziamenti e dei sussidi che abbiamo ricevuto dal governo, questi sono stati il risultato di un lavoro che abbiamo fatto con queste organizzazioni, che abbiamo appunto lavorato per ottenere questi finanziamenti. E fin da subito abbiamo visto la collaborazione di organizzazioni molto grandi e anche molto piccole, e infatti parliamo di telefonate che si tenevano alle 3 del pomeriggio, dove appunto i rappresentanti di queste organizzazioni parlavano tra di loro per riuscire ad ottenere i fondi, e questo è avvenuto in tutto il settore.
But when you talk about organization, institution and organization, which kind of organization do you refer to? Because in the tank, you have everything. You have theater, art, ballet, music, and whatever. So was it so broad, the sphere of partnership that you had?
Yes, it was very broad. It was cultural institutions from the largest largest companies, to be clear, to the smallest. So And I just wanted to say that the narrative that you were speaking of is so critical. And that was something for us that I think the second week of the pandemic, I was listening to a development advocate speaking on the subject. And the message was clear that even if programming slowed, we had to keep going. We had to keep communicating to our communities, audience, artists, our elected officials. We had to keep the foundations that we were open for business, even though we were closed for that long. So how could we do that was the question that we were kind of faced with initially. And what we did was served our mission and kept making work. I'd love to just give 2 examples. One was of course, we couldn't do theater inside, so we partnered with another organization, On Guard Arts, that is a theater producer that does outside, often immersive work. And we worked with a business improvement district, which is a group of businesses in a certain part of Manhattan. And we created an outside festival of new work completely funded by the business improvement district. And that was an area that was hard hit by the pandemic and wasn't getting the foot traffic and needed artists to draw the people back to the neighborhood. So that's the kind of symbiotic creative partnering that we all kind of turn to.
Quando ha parlato di organizzazioni, che tipo di organizzazioni intendeva? Perché naturalmente all'interno del The Tank ci sono diversi tipi di arte, c'è la danza, c'è il balletto, c'è il teatro. Quindi lei si riferiva a tutti questi tipi di organizzazioni, quindi era un lavoro così ampio? Sì, assolutamente, perché si trattava di un'istituzione culturale e quindi abbiamo coinvolto delle aziende molto grandi ma anche molto piccole. E quando la signora Pineda parlava di quello che è successo loro, per me è importantissimo questo, per noi è stato critico. Infatti se penso alla seconda settimana dallo scoppio della pandemia, mentre ascoltavo i sostenitori di questo settore, il loro messaggio era chiarissimo per me, perché anche se avessimo continuato in maniera lenta a lavorare, avremmo dovuto comunque farlo. E quindi dovevamo cercare di comunicare alla comunità, alle fondazioni, che noi eravamo aperti, anche se effettivamente in pratica non lo eravamo. Ma come potevamo farlo? Abbiamo continuato a lavorare, vorrei dare 2 esempi di quello che abbiamo fatto. Il primo è che i nostri teatri erano ovviamente chiusi, non potevamo lavorare all'interno. E quindi ci siamo organizzati per coinvolgere un'associazione di Manhattan, cioè il Business Improvement District, per creare dei festival all'aperto e appunto finanziati da questa organizzazione, e avevamo bisogno di artisti per attrarre pubblico, e quindi questo è quello che io che io descrivo come una collaborazione simbiotica.
That's very interesting, and really it's a connection that I can hear, that I heard from many things that were said during the day. How is it now? Have you started? Have you come back? How your business model has changed after this experience, and which are the previews that you have of your action?
We do have audiences returning, and we do have artists returning. We had a program recently that the government gave out $5,000 grants to artists, and we helped. I think we did in October, we did 13 projects to support them. We have, we're continuing to live stream our on-site shows because we also appreciate that they're accessible to a wider audience. And we are, it's getting colder now, but we continue to do work out in the streets through the program that Randy talked about as well. So we've just kind of continued to do everything. And, but we do see audiences returning.
That's good. But the last one, very short one, do you think that the audience has changed itself?
We've surveyed our audiences to see their comfort level with COVID. I think, yes, I think all of us have changed. But I do actually see through what the audiences we see coming back to the tank and my own experiences out in the city, I think we all know there's an insatiable craving now to be in live performance after being deprived. And it is true, they're coming back. But not at the same speed, no. Everyone is making their own kind of feeling. But as I'm speaking a long time, I know I am, sorry. We just, you know, in the United States, we just saw the approval of the vaccine for children 5 years old and above. And that's another milestone, you know, so as these things happen, they'll affect audiences we've seen incrementally.
Questo è molto interessante e ho sentito una grande connessione in tutti i discorsi che sono stati fatti oggi con questo argomento. Ma com'è che sta andando adesso il vostro progetto? È cambiato il vostro modello di business e ci sono delle previsioni riguardo alle vostre azioni future? Allora, sicuramente il pubblico e gli artisti stanno tornando e recentemente il governo ha approvato dei fondi per $5.000 e infatti ad ottobre noi abbiamo dato avvio a 13 progetti e continuiamo a trasmettere online i nostri spettacoli che facciamo però in teatro, perché pensiamo che questo renda gli spettacoli più accessibili e così possiamo coinvolgere un pubblico più ampio. Continuiamo a fare tutte queste cose. Pensa che il pubblico adesso stia cambiando? Sì, abbiamo fatto una ricerca, abbiamo intervistato il nostro pubblico, effettivamente questo è cambiato, ma vedo che stanno tornando le persone, stanno tornando in teatro e tutti sappiamo che adesso c'è una grandissima voglia di partecipare agli spettacoli. Naturalmente non tutti si muovono con la stessa velocità, però comunque sta tornando. E per esempio una cosa molto positiva è il fatto che negli Stati Uniti è stato recentemente approvato il vaccino per i bambini dai 5 anni in su e questo sicuramente apporterà grandi benefici al nostro progetto.
So thank you very much for being here and for having taught us what you do at the tank. Thank you. E adesso è arrivato il momento delle domande. Se volete rimanere qui con me intanto che qualcuno dal pubblico...
Now we have time for questions. And if you want to stay with us, I don't know where we can have the questions from the people who are online. I can have them.
Posso avvicinare
Join you if you have some questions.
Il tuo intervento iniziale ci ha dato il frame.
Intervention gave us the framework.
I colleghi si sono mossi. Abbiamo visto che la differenza fra l'Italia e gli Stati Uniti non è così grande poi alla fin fine.
United States is not that big.
Sì, in effetti mi ha piacevolmente sorpreso questa cosa perché
Was surprised by this aspect because United States has something that we don't have. Because fiscality is completely different. In fact, I imagine that material for the arts has to deal with financial system that facilitates the action of private entities. Have a tax discount. In Italy, we have the art bonus that has just arrived. And I think that we should engage in a different way for culture, of course, but I don't know if here in our country, such a sustainable experience, such the material for the arts experience. But I was really touched that from the productive point of view and from the strategies of the theaters, there are similarities between Italy and United States, but we should probably look to the specific particularities. But thank you. I think that also the study case of Menotti Teatro Filippo Perego was quite interesting, and I'm really thankful about it. An aspect that probably has not been really highlighted of plays, spectacles, and the production, of course.
La produzione, la distribuzione, che è anche un tema che aveva iniziato a introdurre.
Which was a theme that Professor Esposito tried to introduce. I have a question for to activate Zoom. We can involve everyone with the questions.
Faccio un po' fatica a rispondere ad una domanda perché per esperienza
question,
la nostra realtà è una realtà
because our reality is quite complex, and sustainability of production
voi considerate che la nostra struttura
general environment, so you have to consider that our structure produces on average 7, 8, at maximum 10 spectacles. The plays are created at in our theater, while other productions are wider and involve more people and more actors. And if I think about New York, last time I was in New York was for a 12-hour play
Center Theater Festival
in at the Lincoln Center Theater Festival, and it was in 2010. So it's clear that for such a production, the budget, all of the budget is more precise, and it has, of course, it was expensive production. We've been to Paris, New York, Amsterdam, Athena, and in Italy, but it was such an important event that the festivals and the international festivals answered enthusiastic way. So it depends on the year, on the season of the theater. But I can say that it is more complex here in Italy, because we don't talk about the single event that is produced and that can be sold. We have to think about the results, the amortization during the season, the seasons, because we talk about 2 or 3 seasons too.
The sustainability of the production at the tank.
The tank co-produces, it used to have a regular number, but during the pandemic, during the pandemic, we did 10 co-productions. So those are, shows that happen typically in partnership. They're typically up for critical review, and they're generally larger in scale, fully designed than things that are presented at the tank. I think that that scalability is really critical, that it's different, of course, with emerging artists than, a company working at Lincoln Center. But there is also this time that we've just been through, I think, is an opportunity to reevaluate the way we distribute resources, to whom we distribute resources, who is getting the opportunity to have resources. And I think that and then looking at how the way theater is very wasteful. And so that's why this is so important. And so thinking about how, even in larger productions, you can begin to think differently about how resources are distributed, think more equitably about how designers are paid. That's something, for instance, that people are talking a lot about in New York. And then you have things like the Broadway Green Alliance that encourages the use of more sustainable lighting equipment, for instance, or the recycling of playbill inserts, or when you make a small change across an entire sector, it can be profoundly, just as materials for the arts is a perfect example, it can be profound. Think about from 1978, how many resources have been saved and given to artists who need them. That was a lot.
Megan, come affrontate la sostenibilità delle produzioni al The Tank? Allora, noi prima facevamo delle coproduzioni di un numero regolare di spettacoli, e adesso con la pandemia siamo riusciti a coprodurre circa 10 spettacoli. E penso che la scalabilità sia una questione critica. Sicuramente è diverso per la questione degli artisti emergenti, ma questo periodo per noi comunque costituisce un'opportunità di riconsiderare il valore e il modo in cui distribuiamo le risorse e a chi le distribuiamo. E quindi consideriamo anche il fatto che il teatro è un'industria che spreca molto e anche nelle produzioni più grandi possiamo ripensare a un modo di agire diversamente, in modo più equo, e quindi per esempio la questione di come vengono pagati i designer, che questo è molto importante, per esempio in America, a New York. E poi ci sono anche delle associazioni come per esempio la Broadway Green Alliance, che incoraggia l'utilizzo di strumenti riciclati, comunque che non sprechino molto. E per questo motivo si può fare cambiamento, e un ottimo esempio, un esempio virtuoso è per esempio Material for the Arts.
Benissimo. L'ultima domanda telegrafica, se c'è, ad Angelo Rindone.
So one last question to Angelo.
Benissimo. Telegrafico. Quanto è veramente sentito il tema sociale e del climate change e della sostenibilità?
So, Angelo, do you think that small founders really think about climate change and sustainability? Well, I'll be really short and I'll tell you some data. So as I was saying, we introduced in our platform the SDGs of the UN, and in less than a year, more than 5,000 projects chose at least one of the UN's SDGs. So this means that we want to create some projects that are important and people wish to fund and sustain sustainable projects. People want to fund projects that can improve the environment, and so I think that this is a very important thing. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Ensa. If there are no other questions from the public, are there any questions online? One, okay. Well, maybe more than one question. Let me check.
Rispetto al passato, Fondazione Cariplo riscontra nelle domande per i fondi maggiore aspirazione
So the Cariplo Foundation is seeing more requests from people with a master degree, specializing in fundraising or not. Yes. I think that organizations need to get money in many different ways, so they can be independent from public money. So for sure, there's a big request for young professionals that can give advice and consulting, and we try to make the organizations hire these kind of people. So this question, honestly, I would like that our guests could write down the answer, because I think that the answer should be really long. And the question is, how can we bring the theater when there is none? Can we organize theater shows outside? In some remote areas of cities. I'm sure that Randy and Megan already said things that could answer this question. I think we could make theater shows outside.
Randy, are you there? Oh, okay. Well, then she would be Randy is my friend, I will say. So she will know what is it.
Okay.
Very good to answer this question. But let me say, we need organizations that are established to create opportunities for outreach so we need companies to invite communities into their spaces. And then we need funds to go to the places where people don't have the resources, so that they can be deciding how those resources should be funded. In the United States, in New York, we have organizations already, and perhaps they don't have the infrastructure yet. They don't have the network or community or they don't know that they do, because it's a surprise.
Yeah.
So in those, they need the funding to be able to create the infrastructure to be able to make that work happen where they are.
Noi abbiamo bisogno di organizzazioni già esistenti e abbastanza importanti perché queste creino opportunità, quindi abbiamo bisogno di organizzazioni che invitino le persone e attraggano un pubblico, e abbiamo anche bisogno di fondi dove le persone non hanno le risorse necessarie. Quindi per esempio negli Stati Uniti, a New York, noi abbiamo questo tipo di organizzazioni, magari non abbiamo le infrastrutture ancora, e queste organizzazioni non sanno di avere il network giusto, le conoscenze giuste, però possono effettivamente aiutare, e quindi abbiamo bisogno di fondi per creare teatro dove questo ancora non esiste.
This is just to say, we do a crowdfunding annually as an organization. And I would say that the majority of there's small dollar donations that most people would not pursue a tax write-off, for instance. They're not high enough donations to give them that. They're not giving to get. They're giving because they care about that theater. So we do a crowdfunding annually now, and it's actually a moment of celebration rather than kind of ask for money. It's a moment of celebrating where people give back, and it's a community building event.
Noi facciamo opere di crowdfunding annualmente al The Tank, e quindi queste donazioni che riceviamo non sono fatte perché le persone vogliono avere qualcosa in cambio, ma semplicemente perché a loro importa del teatro, e quindi per noi è un momento molto importante di celebrazione, perché non è che semplicemente chiediamo soldi alle persone, ma è un momento per creare un senso di comunità.
So, thank you very much, grazie ancora, grazie a tutti, eventualmente manderemo le altre domande ai relatori per avere una risposta scritta, appunto, anche perché qualcuna è ancora più lunga, e quindi grazie davvero. E chiamo sul palco a questo punto
Now I call up on stage the Milan Public Affairs Officer, Anthony Deaton. He works for the US Embassy Milan.
Perché mi hanno detto che potrei fare il mio intervento in inglese. Ho
They
preparato...
told me I could do an English speech, and it would be nice because I don't really speak a great Italian. And my text is also a bit philosophical, and it talks about cultural diplomacy.
So I will speak in English. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tony Deaton, and I'm the consul for culture and press at the U.S. Consulate General in Milan, and a member of the broader U.S. Mission to Italy team. As you know, our embassy is based in Rome. So I'm very grateful for the opportunity to talk with all of you today about what we do here in Italy in terms of cultural diplomacy. And I want to thank Donatella Codonessu and my counterpart in the United States who may be listening, Professor Stefano Albertini, and especially my American compatriots who have participated in today's event, Randy Berry, John Claude Kaiser, and Megan Finn. And of course, everybody at Ilium and Onstage who have made the event possible. So cultural diplomacy. I get asked questions about this a lot, and I always feel that it's maybe good to begin with some definitions. Obviously, culture is one of those broad terms. It covers a lot of different things. So I'm going to borrow a scholarly definition and paraphrase it and say simply, for our purposes, or my purpose, culture is the shared patterns of behaviors, interactions, and understandings that are learned through the process of socialization, and that these patterns identify the members of a culture group, and these same patterns distinguish one culture group from another. And then diplomacy. I think everybody knows what that means. In general, it's the formal management of relations between two countries. We might say that traditionally speaking, diplomacy is governments speaking to governments. And if that's the case, then I would argue by extension that cultural diplomacy and the role of diplomats who carry it out is to create the conditions for people in one cultural group to talk and speak directly with people in another cultural group, in another country. So how do we do it? How do we bring it to Italy? First, there's me talking to you. There's me talking to other people in Italy. At the US mission, we know that good diplomacy isn't just about us talking to our counterparts in your government. If we want to strengthen the bonds between our two countries, we have to talk to everyone. We have to try to explain the United States, our foreign policy, our culture, our history, and we also have to listen. We have to listen to you and to understand your cultural values, your aspirations, and transmit that information back to our government and to the people of the United States. So that's one way of doing it. The second way of doing it is to have somebody like Randy Berry or Megan Finn talking to you directly, perhaps supported by us in some way, but speaking independently of the US government. And this is important. The American journalist Edward R. Murrow famously said, quote, The real crucial link in international exchange is the last 3 feet, which is bridged by personal contact. One person talking to another. One person talking to another, person-to-person diplomacy. That is the sort of defines the heart of the cultural diplomatic work we do. Now, COVID has complicated that. You all have talked about it in terms of sustainable theater. Megan was talking about it. But I think that our virtual conversations, which we have carried out throughout the pandemic, are evidence that we can continue that cultural diplomacy even under the most difficult of circumstances. So doing it in Italy, cultural diplomacy, is both interesting and challenging. Obviously, our 2 countries have very strong historical ties. There are nearly 20 million Americans who identify themselves as descendants of Italian immigrants. And there are over 2 million Italian citizens living in the United States. So we share strong familial, professional, political, artistic, educational, and economic connections. Italians listen to jazz. Americans listen to opera. The #1 favorite food in the United States is pizza. That's what Google told me. In Italy, American movies and music are everywhere. In the United States, Elena Ferrante's L'Amica Geniale was a New York Times best-selling novel, and now it's an HBO series. And I have a niece and a nephew who are dying to come to Italy, not to visit me, but to go to Naples because they want to see where that novel and the TV show is set. So we feel like we know each other's countries quite well, though probably not a lot of you have listened to Old Time Country or Bluegrass, and probably very, very few Americans know the name Roberto Murolo. So for all that familiarity we have, there's a lot we don't know or understand. And so the challenge for us with American cultural diplomacy, and it is a challenge for every country, though I think of it as especially significant for us, is that we don't really have an easily identifiable homogeneous culture. The great 19th century American poet Walt Whitman wrote in the introduction to his poem, Leaves of Grass, that America was, quote, not merely a nation, but a teeming nation of nations. So the United States is host to a dizzying array of cultures. How many of you have been to New York City? Okay, so if you've been to New York City, you have witnessed that dizzying array of cultures firsthand. I didn't see the hands that were out in Zoom land, but I'm sure many went up. So we're a nation of immigrants, of indigenous people. We're a country that allowed slavery and then fought a terrible civil war to end it. We are a country that has struggled with segregation and discrimination. And yet out of that struggle have come leaders who, like Martin Luther King Jr., who continue to inspire not only in the United States, but around the world. So we've experienced conflict and division, and yet at the same time, great unity and shared conviction. And while there are certainly many overlapping shared values, we are a country defined by diversity. And this diversity feeds the United States tremendously rich and varied cultural landscape. And it is our diversity ultimately in which we find our strength. And this is part of America's story that gets partially told in music and movies, but our job as diplomats in promoting cultural diversity is to make sure a fuller, more complete story is available to you. The other part of our job is to explain how amidst all this diversity, there is one thing that philosophically speaking does bind us together, namely the democratic principles on which our country was founded. Even if the implementation of those values has been imperfect historically, they are a very significant cultural touchstone for Americans from all walks of life. President Franklin Roosevelt gave a speech at the Museum of Modern Art in New York City in 1939 that made a very strong, and I would argue very American connection between art, politics, and freedom. He said, quote, "What we call liberty in politics results in freedom in the arts. There can be no vitality in the works gathered in a museum unless there exists the right of spontaneous life in the society in which the arts are nourished." And later in the speech, he went on to say, "In encouraging the creation and enjoyment of beautiful things, we are furthering democracy itself." So we, the US government, promote person-to-person cultural dialogues, not just to explain ourselves to one another in areas of mutual interest, but we have a goal, and that is also to protect and improve the conditions for freedom and democracy, whether we're talking about sustainable theater or immigration or human rights. Now, one of our major efforts in this regard is through cultural exchange. These are a critical part of US foreign policy. They are a powerful way for people to see each other's humanity, to build a sense of common purpose. They can change the minds of those who misunderstand us, and they can tell the American story in a way that no policy or speech like this one ever could. So how do we do it in Italy? How many of you have heard of Fulbright? Perhaps, okay, one or two. So the US Department of State supports the Fulbright Scholars and Students Program. It is one of the most renowned educational exchange programs worldwide. And we do it here through the Italy-US Fulbright Commission. Since Fulbright's start in Italy in 1948, which was 2 years after the program began elsewhere for the first time, more than 5,000 American scholars and students have come to Italy on Fulbright grants, and about an equal number of Italians have gone to the United States. And today, 30% of all US-Italy Fulbright scholarships are funded under agreements between the US-Italian Commission and public or private partners. And I think this fact demonstrates that the program is valued not only by our two governments and the people who participate in it, but also by the broader public. And that is demonstrated through their investment in it. And in my mind, that is one of our resounding cultural diplomatic successes in Italy and around the world. But we do other things. We help fund the US Pavilion at the Venice Arts Biennale and at the Venice Architectural Biennale to officially represent the United States in Italy. We offer exchange programs like the International Visitor Leadership Program, in which early and mid-career Italians from a variety of backgrounds travel to the United States for 3 weeks. They get familiarity with their American counterparts. It's not a skills development program, but rather a familiarization program for people from all sorts of sectors, whether it could be in education, in the arts, in NGO management, in cybersecurity. The range is really sort of amazing. And it's one of my favorite programs because for many people, and what we try to prioritize is people who have not had an experience in the United States before. That enhances their understanding, and it helps tell that story through people-to-people connections that we as diplomats can't do ourselves, and so therefore must create the conditions for. We have a program that is called the Young Transatlantic Innovation Leadership Initiative. It's such a long name, so we just call it YTILI. It's a very select program for young entrepreneurs in Europe, and it allows them to spend time and learn about the startup ecosystem in the United States from the East Coast to the West Coast. We do programs with African-American poets. We do programs with women comic book writers and artists. We fund initiatives like Coding Girls that encourages young people, especially young girls and women, to pursue education and careers in STEM fields. We've brought astronauts to Italy and engineers and painters and musicians. And they come and they meet with their counterparts or with students, arts organizations, scientists, you name it. Another point of our cultural diplomatic work is the grants that we give out to Italian nonprofit organizations. We have a program, it's called the Annual Program Statement, and I would encourage anybody who is listening to go to the U.S. Mission to Italy website and look for the information on our APS. It is an opportunity for organizations that have projects that have an American element to it, or that are oriented towards an area of concern for the United States to apply for funding. For example, actually for the last 4 years, we have provided grants to Mix Milano Film Festival. I don't know if you know Mix. They are Italy's largest LGBTQ plus film festival. And we do it because they always feature numerous films by American directors and producers. And we do it because we believe that LGBTQ rights are human rights, and that the struggle to achieve those rights in the United States is similar or instructive to the kinds of struggles that we see in other countries. We know film can make abstract statements about rights more human, more felt, and that can bring solidarity between Americans and Italians who face similar social and cultural challenges. We had a program this year that also brought museums from across Italy together in dialogue, with the Phillips Collection in Washington, D.C. And this was a chance for museum curators to share ideas on how to better open up their museums to groups of people who have been historically excluded from going to museums, or who have not felt invited into these spaces of art and culture, often because of their educational or socioeconomic background. We provide grants to universities all across Italy to support faculty positions in American studies programs. We want to ensure that Italian students have up-to-date access to scholarship and teaching about US literature, history, and politics. In all these efforts, our goal is to foster direct communication and conversation between Americans and Italians on areas of mutual interest that promote the kinds of relationships that support democracy and freedom, and the sort of core values that Italians and Americans already share. It's not just our government talking to your government. It's Americans and Italians talking to each other. Thank you.
If you like to sit here with me, it would be un piacere. Grazie di questo.
Thank you so much. Really, thank you. Thank you, because sometimes it's very difficult to understand that there are two nations that have been linked for so much, like US and Italy. There's still also so much to build, like cultural diplomacy. In 2016, Federica Mogherini promoted a program, an EU program, to start teaching cultural diplomacy in the European Union. And now we will have our final guest. And I'm sorry that we are a little bit late. Stefano Albertini is online, so I kindly ask him to activate his camera online. He's the director of Casa Italiana Zerilli Marimò at NYU. he has a degree in history. And he got his degree in history in Italy, but then he went in the US to Stanford, where he got a PhD. He came to New York in 1994. And then just some years later, he became the director of Casa Italiana Zalilli Malimò at NYU. So Casa Italiana Zalilli Malimò was founded in 1919 by Baroness Mariuccia Zalilli Malimò with the goal of promoting Italian culture. And it also had the goal to create free space open to everyone on all topics related to Italian studies, including language, movies, literature, visual arts. So if Stefano is here, I will leave him the floor. And he will speak about cultural diplomacy in the US. Thank you. Well, I'm here. I think you can hear me. Good evening, everyone. Thanks for inviting me. Thanks to University Ulm. And also thanks to the US Consul in Milan, Anthony Deaton, because he explained what cultural diplomacy is, and so I don't have to do it. His definitions were great and very precise. I would like to talk about my job and what do I do. I promote Italian culture in the US and in New York especially, because I work at NYU. And then I would like to ask some questions if there are any, both online and on stage, because I know that I'm the last speaker. So if we have a bit of a dialogue, it will be nice. So for the first time in my career, I taught a course on cultural diplomacy. I've been doing this job for 25 years, and I think I do it at my best, but I never thought, what is my job? I promote communication, especially cultural and artistic communications. And so thanks to my students, I discovered the theory of what I have been doing for many years. So the first thing I would like to say is that traditionally, cultural diplomacy was between nations. Okay, so the conversation was happening between nations, but in the last couple years, we have the so-called non-traditional participants in this dialogue. We are no longer talking to the governments, but now many other people are contributing. So now cultural diplomacy is very diverse and crowded also. So my job is to making different cultures have a dialogue. So at NYU, I have like about 12 offices abroad. And these offices are in Paris, Prague, London, Florence. And my students can go there to ask for help. Before we were called national homes, now we are called international homes, to underline that internationalization is our goal. We have French houses, Spanish, Chinese. So now cultural diplomacy operates in a non-governative sector. So we operate in many fields: theater, cinema, literature. And this is different in Italy because in Italy, all these things are managed by the government and by the institutions. So we have a different perspective on these cultural exchanges because we are operating in an American university. So we are different. We are American and a university. We're not a government. So this was a very specific example taken from my own life in New York.
Sto parlando a un'audience italiana.
But like, seeing as we are talking to an Italian audience, I will also make another example. We have two museums in Italy. One is called Center for Italian and Modern Arts, CIMA, founded by Laura Mattioli. And then we have Magazine for Italian Art, founded by Giorgio Spano and his wife Nancy. And so these two museums play a role in cultural diplomacy. And these two museums are not governments. They are independent. So we also have a cultural diplomacy between cities and regions, and Italy is doing pretty well on this because it's becoming even more popular, especially for tourism in Italy. In Italy, they decided to open some offices, representative offices abroad, to bring Italian culture abroad. So this is something very important. We don't have just the nations and their organizations, but also independent people talking about cultural diplomacy. And so it's very different from what is traditional, but it offers a new perspective. Then I would like to talk about theaters, and in particular about Italian theaters in the US. I said that what people said before about sustainability is right, like how to recycle materials, that is fundamental. And another pillar of sustainability is being inclusive. We do not want anyone to feel excluded from theaters. And this thing in particular is something we focus on. There is an association, Kaiser's Italy Theater, aims to do this cultural exchange.
E direi che una delle caratteristiche principali di questa iniziativa è stata quella di voler.
And I'd say that one of the main characteristics of this initiative is bringing the Italian theater in the 5 neighborhoods of New York before. Because if you think about New York, I bet you all think about Manhattan, but there are other 4 neighborhoods that are bigger than Manhattan. And they are very diverse, ethnically and racially diverse. And so we cannot say that we bring the Italian theater to New York if we only go into Manhattan theaters that everyone knows about. But we purposefully chose to bring Italian theaters into Brooklyn and Bronx, Staten Island, in Queens, in all these neighborhoods where normally Italian theater doesn't go. But not just Italian theater don't go in these neighborhoods. So these places are diverse. And this is fundamental. This is cultural diplomacy. And I think what Kairos Italy Theater is doing is cultural diplomacy. Also, the consul talk about this for a bit. We included LGBTQ plus. And in Italy, this is very difficult, is regarded as controversial. And we try to promote one act. Then there's also women in comedy. Here you see this amazing woman, Franca Valeri, and we try to promote women in comedy, both in Italy and in the US. And then we ask young actors in the whole world to participate in this thing. So I believe that being inclusive is part of being sustainable, and it's really important. It has to be one of our goals. And I would like to stop here so that I can answer your questions if there are any.
Scusatemi, ho un attimo di abbassamento di voce. Grazie mille, dottor Albertini, molto interessante.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Albertini. What you said about being inclusive is very interesting. We briefly talked about it, but never in depth today. So we can talk about all those activities of inclusion, especially being inclusive for those with disabilities. For example, trying to share theater shows with deaf people. And I think that in this case, technology is really useful. And so do you have some questions for Dr. Albertini? Yes, you talked about being inclusive. And this is something we think about a lot. We want theaters to be for everyone. We want theaters to be accessible for everyone, for people that cannot hear well, for example. We also We have a project undergoing to include people that are paraplegics so that they can participate in a show. And this also thanks to ballet and dance. Because for us, theater is not just acting, but also music, dance, and art in general.
Il problema della lingua.
So, the problem of language. Theater is an artistic demonstration that employs the body for sure, but also the language. So, on one hand, we have governments, and on the other hand, we have private entities. So how can we help to make theater in a foreign language more popular? Well, it's something really difficult to say. It's challenging because theater is live. You go on a stage and the show can change. So all these things are challenges for us, and we tried and we keep trying. We are in a phase of experimentation that I personally find really stimulating. And I once again would like to thank Kairos Italy Theater that are bringing our idea on stage. They had the idea of creating subtitles for shows in the theater. So these subtitles allow also deaf people to go and see theater shows. So we are trying to make theaters more accessible. And this helps not just people with disabilities. This helps everyone. So asking ourselves, how can we make a foreign language become something enriching, help us develop? We tried everything to allow foreign people to watch an Italian show in a theater. Of course, it cannot be a super long show, but we tried every single method we could come up with to offer this show in both languages. This is nice also for students because they hear a show first in a language and then immediately after in another language. Usually the cast changes, and we tried this, but also we tried with subtitles. Subtitles are easily accessible. We also tried to make subtitles part of the scenery, not just have subtitles as an option. We really try to make subtitles part of the scenery. And all this is very important. So I think that no one has the perfect solution. no one has the perfect solution for making foreign people understand Italian shows. But what we can do is having an array of possibilities, and then we can choose a different solution. The important thing is having several options, and then we can choose the most accessible one. So diversity is no longer a problem, but a resource. And Laura Caparotti produced a documentary on Italian theater in the US. And this is also very nice, and show that in New York there were Yiddish theater production companies that made shows in New York in Yiddish and Italian. And not only Italian and Yiddish people went there to the show, but also Americans went there because they wanted to listen to actors. Of course, they knew the show and they knew what it was about because it was Shakespeare. And so they went there to watch the performance of the actors. And this happened in the past and was shown in the documentary. And this shows that accessibility is not a new thing. It was popular in the past.
And now let's hear the council point of view from the governmental point of view. How does the American government act in terms of Italian theater in the US?
Per professore Albertini, perché ci sono abbastanza persone in Italia che parlano inglese e normalmente quando il governo...
Because there are so many people that speak English.
Del teatro o un autore, un poeta, lavoriamo in inglese.
So we normally work in English, and obviously possible for us to sustain different programs in Italian, for example. So a text for a theater which can be translated could be sustained. But it is difficult and interesting because recently
che vogliono tradurre
which wanted to translate the plays of August Wilson.
Traduzioni in italiano ancora. Ma traduzione
there are no translations in Italian, so it is always difficult because we need to have someone who is a professional of the field. So we still have to work on this topic and on this issue, and we have to find out a new path.
That's the extent of how I can answer that in Italian.
No, that's perfect. Anche perché appunto credo che come
because I think that
indicava un po' il professor Albertini il problema della traduzione di un pezzo teatrale, di una pièce teatrale, sia anche quello di riportare il contesto storico-culturale.
Report the historical and cultural context that it represents. So we do not only talk about translation, but it is a rewriting. Probably it is more rewriting, or am I wrong?
Please feel free. Intanto che Megan Finn viene con noi, ci raggiunge. Oh, yes, ok. Il problema della traduzione, the problem of translation, which cannot be just a simple plain translation, but it's a complete rewriting of the play with an adaptation to the new situation. I don't know.
So the play that we're going to be doing tomorrow, I know it's tomorrow, it just feels like could be, what day is it? What time is it? In particular, the playwright sets the play in a very specific frame and is playing with language out of an advertising campaign of a brand of a corporation that is the kind of frame of the play. So the specific language is very, very aesthetically important. How then do you, and the choice between meaning and communication, right? So those seem like the same thing, but they're not necessarily when it comes to a piece of theater where you have multiple layers happening simultaneously. So I think it's actually very exciting though to embark on that challenge. It was something that we really loved in preparation for this production, having the opportunity to really engage with the student that was working on it in, what would this word be? You know, and when he came up against roadblocks, how can he articulate this? I think it's delightfully fun, actually, and really great for the work.
Per esempio, lo spettacolo che ci sarà domani è un esempio importante di questo argomento. Effettivamente lo sceneggiatore crea una sorta di cornice in cui fa molto affidamento sulla lingua specifica della pubblicità di un famoso brand. E quindi la lingua è importante dal punto di vista estetico, non solo appunto per la comunicazione, e quindi viene fatta una scelta tra qual è il significato e cosa si vuole esattamente comunicare. Sembra lo stesso quando appunto si sceglie una parola, ma non è così, e quindi è abbastanza emozionante affrontare questa sfida. E infatti quando ci siamo confrontati con lo studente che si occupava della traduzione, eravamo curiosi di capire quale parola avrebbe scelto e quando si trovava davanti a degli ostacoli come avrebbe potuto articolare la sua traduzione.
Da un punto di vista universitario, gli studenti americani che frequentano la New York University e quindi la casa italiana.
So speaking about college students, American students that attend the NYU, are they interested in theater in a foreign language? Well, I have to say that all our activities are directed by the students, but also by citizens, because our goal is opening the doors of NYU to everyone, to the community. So our goal is to open the doors to everyone, not only the students. Of course, they are important because we see them every day. But I also say that they are the most difficult to reach. In this pandemic, one of the few advantages we have is the ability of making online events, because we have not been authorized to open our doors to the general public. So we try to meet halfway with the students and to reach them, and it's something that universities have to do. This challenge is something that is shared also by other universities, of course, because we are a university in a city. And in New York, for example, we have so many options for theater, music, movies. Whatever you want to do or see, you know that in New York, it will be there. So you have so many options. And of course, students don't want to go to their university during their free time. If they are able to, they will go somewhere else. But this pandemic helped us to meet the needs of our students. So we asked them, what do you want to see? What do you want to do? Because so often we consider the general public in our programs, but not the students. For example, our Spanish colleagues had a shorty on LGBTQ in Spanish, and it was open to everyone. And they asked themselves, what do the students want to see? And that was the answer. And then, of course, we have theater students at NYU, and that's another different thing. They attend the American School for the Arts, and so they have other interests, of course, because they have a professional interest in theater, because they study with very famous professionals in the cinema sector and in dramatic writing. So this is a different kind of public, even if they are still NYU students. Like us, for example, we talk a lot with Italian students, American students that study Italian. So we cater to them and we ask them what would they be interested in. So I would say that the most important thing is ask your students, what do you want to do? Yes, I think that with your final sentence, we can close this speech. Because listening to others is important. Listening to others when it comes to crowdfunding, diplomacy, listening to others while organizing theater shows, listening to the artists, catering to their needs, and also catering to the needs of the public. The pandemic, for sure, limited our choices, but we can still have new ideas and let's say synergy, and we can use these ideas when the pandemic will be over. And then we will be able to go to the theater every day. So I thank everyone, but I would also ask to Professor Esposito to come with us on stage.
Allora, innanzitutto grazie a tutti coloro che sono intervenuti. Io ringrazio veramente di cuore Cristina Vannini, è stata una regista fantastica di questa tavola rotonda e le farei veramente un applauso. È stato un pomeriggio molto molto interessante, sono passate quasi 4 ore, non me ne sono accorta. E è stato veramente molto bello ascoltare questi interventi che si sono incrociati proprio su temi che hanno dato una visione a 360 gradi di un mondo che sta tornando.
Complete vision of a world who is coming back in a different way. And before closing our afternoon, I would like to remind the plays that will be at the Menotti Theatre Filippo Perego. Tomorrow, when we went electronic, produced by The Tank. 10th of November at 8 o'clock in their footsteps. So 2 plays to listen to American theater in Italy. Thank you everyone. Let's hope that is just the beginning of a long friendship here in Ulm.